choices are Django CMS or Wagtail.
Yeah.
And they have great admin tools. But then again, you are limited to whatever you can use in Django usually for the front end.
Yes, exactly.
Those are templates.
Exactly. So here come Headless in place. So Headless is basically just a way to consume the data from the CMS or whatever backend you're using with something else.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to HackCast. This is episode number 5, season 2. We are once again in HackSoft studio that is behind the camera. I'm Rado.
I'm Ivo.
Yeah, and today we're going to talk about serverless and perhaps headless. Perhaps headless is going to be the main topic. And this is basically part 3 of our discussion about Next.js. Then we followed up with Vercel. And now we're going to talk about headless because this also plays really well with Next.js and Vercel. And before we start, you promised something last episode.
What was that?
You promised that when we are talking about serverless and headless, you're going to bring a server.
Oh yeah, it's here.
Yeah, so we have a server. It's here.
It's our great computer.
It's our old grader that we were using when we were doing courses.
And for a lot of other stuff, but now it's resting here.
It's retired. It's unplugged, and that's about it. So promise. What's the word for it? Promise kept.
Yes. Talking about serverless with a server nearby.
With the server nearby. All right. So let's start about headless. What's headless, and why do we want to talk about it?
All right. So for me, Next.js is great when it comes to productivity. It got all the needed tools in order to do modern web development focused around front end, and and it plays with Vercel, so you just drag and drop deploy it.
Yep.
And when you get front end library, something that contains components that are just there for you, and then it's extremely powerful in terms of developing front end. Now, what about when it comes to backend? You need to hook it to something. You still need some backend system in order to be really productive on the front end side, right?
So what are the options? You can use Next.
Yes, you
as
can.
The backend.
You can use Next as the backend, but you need to build your own framework around it.
Yeah.
And that's why we're not really using it for the backend. You may stick with the old and proper backend frameworks, like let's say Django, Rails, something like that. But that way you have to do a lot of development and a lot of things that if you're doing, let's say, a quick MVP or something, you may not need to get there.
And you are limited to whatever's available in the ecosystem of your framework. So, for example, if you decide that your backend is going to be Django for whatever you're building, and you want CMS or eCommerce, then you're limited to the options within the Django ecosystem.
Yes. And let's say you need to build something like a content management system with Django. So you're definitely not going to use the Django admin for this. You need to bring some kind of a front end for your backend, and then it is basically a lot of work. On the other side, we have all the well-known content management systems that are there for decades, like WordPress, like Ghost, like whatever. Well, the problem there is that you definitely need to understand the content management system itself. You even need to understand the template language they're using, the language that they're written. You need to know how to write plugins in order to deal with these content management systems, right? And often cases you don't really want to. You want to get all the good things for the CMS, but you don't want to write your own theme. You don't want to write your own plugins. And you want to keep your front-end development inside Next.js while using all the nice benefits from the content management system that you want to use.
Exactly. You kind of want to have best of both worlds. Because for quite a lot of time, things like WordPress, they were driving the technology choices depending on your needs. So if you say, I want a website with a blog, this usually meant, okay, I will go with WordPress because WordPress is great for having a blog and it's kind of great for having a website, but then all of the development needs to also happen within the WordPress context.
Exactly. That means that you probably need to develop some plugins. You probably need to know the template language and how the whole ecosystem there is working, which is a lot of knowledge to be granted.
Yes. And I think it's the same for example, you want to have a Django backend and have a CMS. So your choices are Django CMS or Wagtail.
Yeah.
And they have great admin tools. But then again, you are limited to whatever you can use in Django for the usually for the front end.
Yes, exactly.
Those are templates.
Exactly. So here come Headless in place. So Headless is basically just a way to consume the data from the CMS or whatever backend you're using with something else. So a headless block, a headless CMS would be just an admin panel where you control your data, and then this data is exposed via some kind of APIs to something that is the head, something that is the front end, something that is consuming this data and these APIs in order to render your website.
Exactly, and this is really powerful because if we take the headless approach, then we can say, all right, we want to build a new website, and this new website is going to have block, like for example, our website. Yeah. And then we can say, all right, we're going to use Next.js for everything front-end related. And for the block itself, again, we're going to render it with Next.js.
Yes.
Leveraging all the capabilities there. But for the editing, we still want to use WordPress or Ghost.
Or Ghost, let's say.
Because they have great editors, and it's a familiar tool that a lot of people can use, and you don't have to build your own editing UI and backend and so on and so forth.
Absolutely, yeah. So
this is really powerful.
So the content management systems, they're really good at managing the content, providing you the best possible content management experience in the admin panel. But when it comes to front end, you need to be really productive with your tools and build the front end the way you like to do. And when you combine this with Next and Vercel, again, this is the point where you get distributed front end all over the world with one centralized content management system in one place, and this gets the thing really powerful.
Yeah, and again, it's all about having the options to use Next on the front end, and then if you are to do a blog, then use Ghost or use WordPress or whatever else there is. And most of the content management systems and e-commerce systems and blogging systems nowadays, they support the so-called headless mode, which is basically having an API and not relying on how they implement the front end. And this is really powerful. So
in theory, you can even combine multiple CMSs for multiple things. So for example, if you are going to have a blog on your website and let's say something that displays some kind of data, you can use a proper CMS for the data and a blogging platform like Ghost for the blog itself. And if they're not interconnected with each other a lot, it actually works great.
Yes.
So your Next.js can consume both APIs and get information from both of the places.
So for example, our website, HackSoft.io, currently the blog is managed by Ghost, by a headless Ghost instance that we are running
on DigitalOcean,
I think. And we are now going to add CMS because everything is basically static on our
the content on our
React.
Content on our website, except the blog, of course, is changing really infrequently. It's changing once every couple of months. So until now, it is just in a JSON file in the front-end repository. But now we are migrating it to some kind of headless CMS in order to be able to change the content from time to time without deploying and without making any kind of deployments and changes in the code.
And we're going to try with Dato?
I think it's Dato CMS, which actually provides you a non-code solution for creating your models. We can say, okay, we have, let's say, teammates, and each teammate is going to have a picture, a full name, a position, and a couple other fields. And it's giving you the admin panel where you can actually put the data in. Instead of having a JSON file, as we do at the moment, we are going to enter this data into Dato CMS. And the Next.js app is just going to consume this data via some kind of API.
And it's extremely powerful because you can leverage multiple headless platforms depending on your needs.
Absolutely.
And for blogging and for CMS, there are multiple options. What about e-commerce? As they say.
For e-commerce, I think all the major solutions out there now support headless modes. let's say Shopify, you can run your Shopify shop entirely headless and write your own front end based on your needs.
Yep. And for example, Shopify perhaps is the most popular example. You can run it in headless mode, as you said, built on Next.js. If you want to stick in, for example, stay in Django world for the backend, there are some good platforms, open source platforms for e-commerce that I know that you've been using.
Yeah, something called, I think it's Sailor.
I call it Salor.
Yeah, but probably it's Sailor. I don't know. It is Django based, and again, it is absolutely headless. It just provides a GraphQL API over the data that it defines, so you can use it with a bunch of mutations. So you can purchase things, you can create your own cart, and some GraphQL specific things that we're going to talk about a little bit later today, probably.
Yeah.
But there are solutions, because my experience was pretty straightforward. I understood that if I want to use a non-headless platform, let's say I entered Shopify and I saw some default themes and I say, oh, they look good. I just want to modify some of the things. And then I understood that I need to learn their template language and the way they're doing things. And I was, okay, Next.js is something I know. How can I stick with Next.js and use all these goodies that the platforms like Shopify and Seller are giving to me?
Exactly.
So headless was the great solution here. And combining this with the different methods of rendering your content, especially when it's not changing too much. For example, if you have some products that they're not changing on a daily basis, right? You have, let's say, 200 products that you're changing once every couple of weeks. So you can totally go with some kind of static rendering in order to optimize your website, making it as fast as possible and distribute it all over the world, of course, and having a single source of truth. Where is your data, in which platform your data is, and how many, let's say, products you have, and all of this is managed in one place, and just getting centralized all over the world with Vercel and Next. It works great.
Yeah, so this is where you can basically leverage the power of, and I've been saying this wrong for the past 2 episodes. Sorry, Teddy, that you had to edit it. You can leverage the incremental static regeneration part of Next and Vercel, where all your product pages are basically cached because they're not changing that often. Yeah. And whenever something changes on the backends, is it the head or it's the headless thing? Whenever something changes on the headless part,
yeah, the head
is the front end.
Yeah, the head is the front end.
Then you can just perhaps have a webhook, combine it with something else, and just call the API that's going to revalidate whatever static content you have, and then you're good to go.
Yeah, webhooks are one of the major features of all the headless platforms and the platforms that can be used as headless, because you just need to set up your webhooks properly in order to trigger them when, for example, I'm changing a product or a retailer or a review or something else. The headless platform is just triggering a webhook saying, hey, Next, this object just updated. Can you please re-render your stuff, distribute all over the world so everyone know that this product, let's say, is not available anymore, or we change the images, or we change the description, or so on.
So I know that you have actually implemented this. Are you actually calling Next an API route, or you go through something like Integromat, which is now Make? Integromat was great name. Make, it's average. Anyway, are you going through Integromat and then Vercel, or straight to Vercel?
Straight to Vercel, straight to the API route that is saying, okay, what was the object that was updated? Okay, this object is presented in this page. Let's re-render all of them, and we are good to go.
All right, got it.
So I find a way to do the authentication directly with webhooks. I'm just attaching a param to the URL, and we're pretty much good to go there.
All right, yeah. And you mentioned GraphQL?
Yes, GraphQL is something that works really well with headless. Just because the API that the headless system is providing, most of the time it is GraphQL. Some headless system provide RESTful API and a GraphQL API, but what is commonly used is the GraphQL API, just because you can query exactly what you want on given places and nothing more. So the GraphQL is just giving you a bunch of objects and the relations between them and a bunch of mutations. And knowing what the schema is, you can just query exactly what you want. For example, on the detail page of the product, I want all of the information about the product. On the index page, I'm only showing a little icon of the product and the title and probably the price, so I want to query only these objects. On, let's say, the suggested categories, I can query only the categories, but only 3 items for every category, and then the next couple of items I'm going to query after this. So you have all this freedom to query exactly what you want and nothing more, which is something that is harder to do using RESTful APIs, or even some case impossible. So you end up querying a lot more things that you need, which is again slowing down your things.
Yeah, and so Cellular supports GraphQL.
Yes.
Datto, I think, supports GraphQL. What about Ghost?
It is. I think it's a RESTful API.
I think it's a RESTful API.
It is.
Yeah.
But the case there is that we are just fetching articles, so we don't have anything else in terms of information in the Ghost itself. And Ghost is not in any way headless first. Ghost, they support their marketplace, they have their own template language and so on. There is a way to run it headlessly, but they are not headless first in any way.
For sure.
Still, which is something to keep in mind. If the system is not designed to be used headlessly, then probably you're going to face some problems down the road.
Yeah. So Ghost and WordPress adapted to the headless world. And it also plays really well with TypeScript, and you can GraphQL. Use the Explorer to figure out the fields.
Absolutely, yeah. GraphQL is playing nice with TypeScript. You can generate all the possible objects you can get from the GraphQL API, and then you have some magical things like code generation and validation and things like this. So it's making it way easier than before.
Yeah, and perhaps the reasoning or the motivation behind all of this is, you mentioned it in the beginning, you can be really productive by combining all those tools together, like using Next.js, because most probably you're pretty good with React and front-end programming with React. Vercel for infrastructure, because it's like zero configuration. You just throw it there and it runs. And then you can pick and choose and combine the various headless services to build something that's actually usable and can be used by end users. And sometimes you need to combine 2 or 3 services together, but have a common way to authenticate users between them. So how do you do that?
Well, probably using something like Next.out, that is using the middlewares in Next.js in order to provide you with meaningful authentication methods. I haven't actually used it a lot, since most of the projects I've been working on are kind of public. I mean, every page there is public. So if you need to authenticate, then probably you need to go to the backend somehow and validate your real user. But I think that definitely Next.out is the way to go there.
So yeah, you can. Next.out is it's an implementation around authentication, and they support OAuth and stuff like this, but it's basically a bunch of API routes and a bunch of middlewares combined together that can give you out of the box, ready to go authentication on top of Next. And they use they store your session in a cookie in an encrypted way. But when it comes to actually authenticating users, you need to have basically a way you need to have an out server, some kind of a service or a server that knows how to authenticate users. And usually, from our experience, this is where Django comes in, and our core backend service is doing the authentication, and you go there and you can hook this with Next.out. But you can also use services like Auth0, Firebase, and
whatever,
and all of those services. And it takes some time to figure out what you actually need, especially if you have Next.out in the equation. But this is how you approach authentication. For example, right now what I'm testing is I want to have a Next application where everyone who has HackSoft email can authenticate with Google OAuth, and no one else. And it actually took me 4 hours in total 1 hour was fighting with ChatGPT to figure out that the solution that it provided was for previous version of Next and Next Out.
All right.
So I had to debug the code there. But it's really, once you know what you're doing, it's quite straightforward, and you can get to a working prototype in production really, really fast. And this is what I like about it.
I've been thinking recently why it's now that most of the CMS systems are starting to support headless. And when I open most of the websites, almost all of them, they have tutorials how to go with Next.js or Gatsby or something similar. And I'm thinking that now that we have a serverless backend for our front end, unleashes the whole potential of doing such things, because you pretty often need some kind of a backend on your front end in order to do things like image resizing, caching, even rendering social cards or things like that. So before that, if you want just to go with React, there is not an easy way to do all of this that combines basically all of these nice tools. And now that we have React with Next and Vercel, we can pretty much have our backend. We can pretty much have a serverless backend for our front end.
Yes.
And it's pretty handy sometimes, even in terms of, let's say you want to do a sitemap. You want to do something that for sure needs to be, it needs a backend in order to render. You cannot do like only JavaScript-based sitemap. And you can just create an API route, query the data you need from the GraphQL API, do some transformation with JavaScript in order to render as XML, and just throw it out there.
Yeah.
And it works. It may not be the great solution out there, but it works just because you can have backend functionality on your front-end project. If you don't have something on your CMS, you can just fine-tune, build some things around it, and have it there in the React in the next project.
Yeah, I think the same. It was the missing part of full-stack web development, having front-end with back-end capabilities, but also having back-end with back-end capabilities, and also having headless systems, and also having serverless systems. And then combining everything together is really, really powerful. And I believe this is the way to go forward, because it gives you productivity and it gives you quite a lot of choice, which is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we covered everything that we wanted to cover.
Yeah, my biggest takeaways here is that sometimes you don't really need to write any kind of complex backend. Sometimes there are a lot of tools that can just help you build the MVP, build the thing that you need in terms of backend, and just use the tools that you're already productive with in order to build your front end.
Yes, same takeaway for me. It's great, and I believe there's going to be much more development in this area, and it's going to be better for us software developers to build better software.
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's it. The server is resting here. That was for episode 5. We talked about headless. If you have any questions for us, or you want to comment on the topics that we are discussing, please feel free to use YouTube comments or whatever else you have a comment, and there's a HackCast context next to it. Write a comment there, subscribe, of course, and we'll very much like to know what people are thinking about the topics that we are currently discussing.
Absolutely. All right.
And see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.